It's 9:30, time to begin, and we're certainly grateful for the opportunity. Our study is in the trial of Jesus, the phases of the Roman trial. We'll get there in a moment. And our readings are now in the New Testament, personal, private readings, and that we publicly review. We started Wednesday night. Matthew, we mentioned, is emphasizing Jesus' what? His kingship. I may have told you before that used to, when I was teaching some school children in the 9th grade, we started off teaching the life of Jesus, just Matthew, and I would just kind of talk through a harmony, bring in other points, make them turn, but then we emphasize Matthew. And so in order to help remember, I emphasized the kingship. And so it went something like this. Chapter 1 was genealogy of the king. And 2 was honor and jealousy toward the king. Well, you can figure out honor paid by the wise men, jealousy by Herod. 3 was announcement of the kingdom and a baptism of the king. Announcement of the kingdom by John the Baptist. And then baptism, temptation of the king in 4. And then 5, 6, and 7, constitution of the kingdom. And that's where we ended Wednesday night. The emphasis again is the kingdom of the very first beatitude. Blessed are the poor in spirit, theirs is the kingdom of heaven. It continues on with so many things that emphasize the nature of the kingdom. The beatitudes, dispositions toward God, toward ourselves, toward other men, and the kind of influence we need to have, salt and light, specifics that are dealt with. And then in chapter 6, you do right not to be what? Seen of men, but to please the Father in heaven. And then we need to seek or lay up for ourselves treasures where? In heaven. All right? And then in 7, he says, not everybody understands the significance of all this. So judge not that you be not judged. And those who just simply reject it, we're not to cast our pearls before swine or give that which is holy to dogs. And then, yet those who genuinely want to go to heaven, genuinely love the Lord, it's doable. Ask, seek, knock, and it shall be open to you. And so he compares that to a father, a physical father who gives, a son does not ask for a piece of bread and he gives him a stone, or a piece of meat and he gives him a serpent. If you then, in comparison to God being evil, know how to give good things, how much more shall your Father in heaven give you good things? And so, but yet he warns us that there are going to be false prophets who deter us. Beware of false prophets. They come looking like what? In sheep's clothing, but inwardly they're ravenous wolves. But the way we know them is by their fruits. Good. And then he concludes, we're leaving out some, enter ye into the straight gate, the 2 gates, the 2 ways, the 2 groups of people, and the 2 eternal destinies. And then he says, everyone who hears these words of mine and does them shall be like a what? A wise man who built his house on the rock. Compared to the man who hears these words but does them not. He's the what? Foolish man, built his house on the sand. It ends by saying that they were astounded, for he was one who spoke with authority, not as the scribes. Then in 9 and 10, in 8 and 9, he shows his authority by a number of what? The number of miracles, the number of works that he did. And there are about 10, if you just chronicle them each, that he accomplished in those chapters, in all kinds of varieties of ways. And then in 10, he sends out the 12 on the apostles. The 12 apostles of the limited commission. 11, John is in prison, and he asks, is he the one, or look we for another? 11 really shows the rejection of John as well as the Christ. I used to say the rejection of the king and his forerunner as a chapter content. And then 12, enemies of the king. Jesus has gone through, his disciples have gone through the grain fields, and they plucked some grain on the Sabbath day. And then he heals a man who had a triple problem, and they said he does it by Beelzebub. And then he gives a lengthy response to that. All right, so that brings us down to where our reading ends today, and we'll go get on into the parables and go on from there next week. Wednesday, I'm sorry. All right, I want us to go right into where we are. I've changed up some of the charts. Some of them are the same, but to keep us on the same page, the overall eras, time periods of the life of Jesus we've been talking about. Last week, or actually 10 days, and we've been on Thursday night, or Thursday night, and now we're on into Friday morning. The wee hours of, well, actually now in our study of the Jesus before Pilate, and then Herod, and then Pilate, we actually have them after sunup on Friday. All right, we pointed out that here in the last several studies, we had Jesus over here in the Garden of Gethsemane, and then he's taken to Annas, and then Caiaphas, and then the Sanhedrin. All right, so that's the area where Jesus was during the garden and the Jewish trials, and then they formally condemned him somewhere likely in this area of the Temple Mount, and then the fortress of Antonia is up in, if I can find it here, can't see it on this map. It would be right in this area, the northwest corner. And so they take him up, oh, here it is, right here, the northwest corner of the Temple Mount. And here's another picture of it. We showed these earlier. This is where, on this occasion, Pilate as well as Herod are in the city. Herod usually was in Tiberias, Pilate in Caesarea. So they were here because of what? What's the big event? What's that? The feast. That's right, Feast of Passover. And in this model of Jerusalem that we've shown, the fortress of Antonia is over here in this northwestern corner. The Solomon's porch that we learn about in the we actually read about it in John 10, but also in the book of Acts is there. This area right here. And here's the fortress, possibly the steps that Paul would have given his speech on there. I wanted to come on down, and these are some I've shown you before. This is what it would have been the area. Now, look, as a Jewish school, or a school, I shouldn't say Jewish, but a school in this area, which is in the northwestern part of the Temple Mount where the fortress of Antonia would have been. We looked at applications, and then Wednesday night, we were in the second stage of the Roman trial, and my charts locked up, and I really wanted to redo them and show. Here is a picture, a family tree of the Herodian family, beginning with Antipater, and then of course who comes onto the scene significantly in the Bible story is Herod the Great, who we know had all the baby males in Bethlehem killed when he found out that there was supposed to be born this king of the Jews. Herod Antipas had two brothers named Philip. Here's Herod Antipas. And he had two brothers, Herod Philip and Philip over here. And insofar as the story is concerned, this Philip is known as the Tetrarch, or ruler of the fourth, of Iturea and Trachonitis. And this Herod Philip over here, was banished by his father. He lived in Rome with his wife Herodias, down here, and daughter Salome. When Herod Antipas, over here now, visited, he wooed Herodias, away from her and took him to himself. And so she's married originally to Herod Philip. And then Herod Antipas comes and he woos her away from his brother. And so she was a niece to both, having been the daughter of Aristobulus. So she's a niece both to Herod Philip and Herod Antipas. And that actually is what made it unlawful for her to, when John said it's not lawful for thee to have thy brother Philip's wife, it was the type of an incest that the law had forbidden. Anyway, I wanted to come on with that and then look back here at Herod Antipas, which is the part that we're studying right now, the significance of him in the Bible story. This Herod, John rebuked for having his brother Philip's wife. That goes back in Matthew 14 and the parallel accounts in Matthew 14, that should be Mark 6 instead of Matthew. And the same one was mentioned in Luke 3. This Herod Antipas, had John in prison and beheaded due to his rebuking him for having his brother Philip's wife. This Herod is the one who had heard about Jesus' miracles earlier and wanted to see him. Let's just stop just for a second. I think we talked about this briefly, but we'll make short shrift of it. But look at Luke 9. This is Luke's account of the limited commission. Whoever has 7 through 9. Luke 9, 7 through 9. Read it. You have it, Linda?
Yes, sir. Now Herod the Tetrarch heard about all that was happening, and he was perplexed, because it was said by some that John had been raised from the dead, by some that Elijah had appeared, and by others that one of the prophets of old had risen. Herod said, John I beheaded, but who is this about whom I hear such things? And he sought to see him.
Yeah, he had heard about him and he sought to see him. Now we're going to see in this account in Luke 23 that his only reason really for wanting to see Jesus was he thought Jesus might do what? Work a miracle. And so really wasn't interested in, just more of a carnival sideshow. So he heard about Jesus. Yes. Did you say something, sweet? Did somebody say something? Thought I heard. Okay. Nobody said anything? I kept. Okay. He had heard about Jesus' miracles. He wanted to see him. And then in Luke 13 is where Jesus said, go tell that fox that the Son of Man does certain things. And now he's the one before whom Jesus is being tried. So he had, we might say, a storied history in a bad way. His father, grandfather, his marriage, all of that, just political power, and not really interested in truth. But this is the one who was here in Jerusalem due to the feast, and Pilate thought he might try to rid himself of any kind of a decision on Jesus by giving him to Herod. Now, the reason he felt like that was a good move is because Jesus, they said, was of what region? Galilee. And so when Pilate said, okay, he's from Galilee, well, Herod's over that. He's a portion of that. And so, it just all fit together. But when, if you'll notice again, and we'll go on from here, look at Luke 23. We answered all of our questions Wednesday night. But in Luke 23, in verse 9, Luke 23, 9, he questioned him in many words, but he answered him nothing. And chief priests and scribes stood vehemently accusing him. And Herod with his soldiers set him at naught. Just another way of saying insulted, counted him nothing, mocked him, arraying him in gorgeous apparel, sent him back to Pilate. And then we'll see in just a moment where Pilate even said in this second interview Pilate has with Jesus and before the Jews, Herod didn't find any guilt, any wrong in him. So Herod doesn't, Pilate doesn't. And in fact, Pilate's wife said, have nothing to do with this just man, this righteous man. So we have innocence coming all around in the accounts here. All right. Now we're in the third stage of the Roman trial. The passages that deal with it, Matthew 27, 15 through 23, Mark 15, 6 through 14, Luke 23, 13 through 22, and then just a couple of verses toward the end of John. What I'd like for us to do is to read these verses, and then we'll go from there. Let's see, Sister Eleanor, if you would, Matthew 27, 15 through 23. Sister Billy, if you would, Mark 15, 6 through 14. Sister Violet, you feel like reading? Not this morning. Brother Richard, Luke 23, 13 through 22. Angela, John 18, 39 and 40. Let's just read these. I'll try to refrain from commenting too much. Matthew 27, 15. Okay?
Now at that feast, the governor was wont to release unto the people the prisoner whom they would. And they had then a notable prisoner called Barabbas. Therefore, when they were gathered together, Pilate said unto them, Whom will ye that I release unto you, Barabbas or Jesus, which is called Christ? For he knew that for envy they had delivered him. How far do I read?
23.
When he was sat down in the judgment seat, his wife sent unto him, saying, Have thou nothing to do with that just man? For I have suffered many things this day in a dream because of him. But the chief priests and elders persuaded the multitude that they should ask Barabbas and destroy Jesus. The governor answered and said unto them, Whether of you of the twain will ye that I release unto you? They said, Barabbas. And Pilate said unto them, What shall I do then with Jesus, which is called Christ? They all say unto him, Let him be crucified. And the governor said, Why, what evil hath he done? But they cried out the more, saying, Let him be crucified.
Yeah, thank you. Luke's account will say that he did this, he argued 3 times with them. He has done nothing evil. There's no reason for him to be crucified. All right, let's go to Mark's account. Mark 15 and verses 6 through 14. Mark 15, 6 through 14.
Now at that feast he released unto them one prisoner, whomsoever they desired. And there was one named Barabbas, which lay bound with them, that had made insurrection with him, who had committed murder in the insurrection. And the multitude cried and to desire him to do as he had ever done unto them. But Pilate answered them, saying, Will ye that I release unto you the King of the Jews? For he knew that the chief priests had delivered him for envy. But the chief priests moved the people that he should rather release Barabbas unto them. And Pilate answered and said again unto them, What will ye then that I shall do unto him whom ye call the King of the Jews? And they cried out again, Crucify him. Then Pilate said unto them, Why, what evil hath he done? And they cried out the more exceedingly, Crucify him.
All right, thank you, Sister Billy. Most of your translations are in the paragraph with the next verse, verse 15, which actually skips what John will include, how Jesus, Pilate rather, has Jesus scourged and then brought back in the interview, and then Pilate, wishing to content the multitude, released unto him Barabbas and delivered Jesus when he had scourged him to be crucified. They just dismissed the proceeding that actually ended in the deaths of many prisoners with just him they scourged. And there's one of the marks of the inspiration of the Scripture is the brevity of it. If this had been written by uninspired men, there would have been reams written on the illegalities, the torture that Jesus underwent, the unfairness of everything. All of that would have been written on at length. I was reading early this morning, rereading actually. I read it years ago. In fact, I saw a date in my book. I bought that book in 1983. I think it's 41 years old. McGarvey's Sermons. And he delivered a sermon on the inspiration of the Scripture to a YMCA in 1893. And it's worth the price of the book, that one sermon. But anyway, he made the point about several marks, internal evidences of the inspiration of the Scripture. And one of them is its brevity. that there's just no way that man, with all of our passions, desires, would have been restrained so as not to go into deep detail as to how all that. There they took him and scourged him, or there they took him and crucified him, and allows the reader to understand what all was involved in the scourge, what all was involved in crucifixion, to be able to put it together and see this is monumental, this is colossal, this is just all of those ideas. All right, let's go to Luke's account now. Luke 23, 13 through 22. Angela. Oh, yours was John. Who was that? Richard, yours. I'm sorry. Richard, Luke 13. I'm sorry, 23, 13 through 22.
And Pilate, when he had called together the chief priests and the rulers and the people, said unto them, Ye have brought this man unto me as one that perverted the people. And behold, I, having examined him before you, have found no fault in this man, touching those things whereof ye accuse him. No, nor yet Herod, for I sent you to him, and lo, nothing worthy of death is done unto him. I will therefore chastise him and release him, for of necessity he must produce one unto them at the feast. And they cried out all at once, saying, Away with this man, and release unto us Barabbas, who for a certain sedition made in the city, and for murder was cast into prison.
Let me stop you right there, Richard. This is the same things mentioned in Matthew and Mark. What two larger accusations were made against Barabbas? What had he been guilty of? Murder and insurrection. Insurrectionist. Exactly, Lee, is exactly what they accused Jesus of being when he really wasn't. And there's one other thing that we'll see in John's account that he was. But he would have been what we would consider public enemy number one. His name and face would have been on every post office in the United States. I mean, he's an insurrectionist. He's murdered people. And we'll see in John there's one other thing. And all right, keep going, Brother Richard.
Pilate, therefore, willing to release Jesus, spake again to them. But they cried out, saying, Crucify him, crucify him. And he said unto them the third time, Why? What evil hath he done? I have found no cause of death in him. I will therefore chastise him and let him go.
And 23. Oh, no, I said 22, didn't I? That's right. It's interesting, chastise, or some of the newer translations use the word punish or whip. It's from a word that really we get discipline from. Discipline, discipline can be used like if a particular area of school is a discipline, you're learning. And discipline can be used in punishment, depends on the context. It's interesting that Pilate says, I will discipline, punish him, and then let him go. But then the specific kind of punishment is actually mentioned in John's account. And that is he was scourged, or some translations say flogged. And we have a note on that. All right, let's move to John's account. Angela. John 18, just a couple of verses. 18, the last couple of verses.
If you have a custom that I should release unto you the one at Passover, will ye therefore that I release unto you the King of the Jews? Then cried they all again, saying, Not this man, but Barabbas. Now Barabbas was a robber.
Now we've got the full picture. So Barabbas was guilty of being an insurrectionist, guilty of murder, and also here a robber. That's why I say he was just, one bad man. And Pilate pitted him, against Jesus. As if, okay, the Jews actually see how, thinking that they would release, Jesus is as much as we can't stand him, he's better than Barabbas. But actually their hatred for Jesus was a whole lot greater than their desire for Barabbas release. Jesus. And so that's what happened. Yes, sir.
Josephus talks a little bit about this in his writings, and he mentions that he's kind of like a highwayman, a warrior, a guerrilla warrior, and
Yeah.
revolutionist. I mean, he's an extremist here,
He's-
what we
yes.
would call.
A radical.
Yes.
He did exactly right. Good point. Good point. All right, let's answer some of our questions here. Number A under 8 on page 110. Not able to shift the responsibility of having an innocent man executed to Herod, Pilate next tries another ploy. What customarily occurred during the feast that Pilate thought might allow him to rid himself of his part in what he knew was murder? He used the occasion to do what? To release a prisoner. Yeah, and evidently that was just some kind of a deed done for the people. No one knows why or when this custom developed, but similar acts were done when officials wanted to favor some occasion. Pilate first called together whom? That's right, chief priest and the rulers and the people. So you had kind of a religious gathering, the chief priest, the rulers among the people, and then the people themselves. And I mentioned in the note, perhaps this was due to the fact that Pilate would not have wanted to take advantage of the Jewish rulers and Jesus' accusers by releasing him in their absence. Likely Pilate would have known about Jesus' triumphal entry the preceding Sunday and would have thought that his popularity would be such that the public would demand his release. Especially would this be so if Pilate pitted a villain of the deepest dye against the innocent Jesus. These expectations were of course misplaced. When they arrived, Pilate had already picked out the 2 men from whom the people could choose. One, of course, was Jesus. Combine all 4 accounts and state what we can learn about the one whom the multitude chose over Jesus. All right, 27:16 of Matthew says he was a what? A what now? I still can't hear. What was that, Kate?
A notorious.
Notorious, okay, a notorious prisoner. A notable. Any other translations on that? Okay, all right. Mark 15:7 says he was bound with those who had made insurrection and had in insurrection committed murder. Yeah. Somebody asked me years ago.
Probably a Roman.
I'm sorry, what was that?
Probably a Roman.
Yeah, could have been. Could have been. Somebody asked me years ago about getting involved in protest, and I said there's nothing good that comes out of them. People always end up fighting and other kinds of things, and you let your voice be known and just leave it at that. But that we've seen that in our country. All kinds of protests end up with nothing but violence, vandalism, murder, and there's no other way for Christians to behave. Luke 23:19, what had he done? Made insurrection and committed murder. And then John 18:40, he was in addition a robber. When Pilate brought the idea before their minds, he also mentioned something he thought was reasonable. Luke 23:14 through 16, what does he offer to do and why? Go ahead and do what to Jesus? Chasten him. Yeah, chasten him. And why? He thought after that he could release him. Yeah, chasten him and then release him. Well, how did the Jews react to that proposal? Yeah, he said, away with this man. They didn't want to have anything to do with that idea. At some point while Pilate was sitting on the judgment seat, his wife sent him a message. What did it say? We've already quoted that, most of you have. Yes, have nothing to do with this just or righteous man. What then is the unanimous verdict concerning Jesus from Pilate, Herod, and Pilate's wife? He was what?
Innocent.
He was innocent. And yet the Jews said this man, the accusation they brought is he arrays himself against Caesar. And so if there had been any modicum of evidence that he's against Rome, they would have seen that.
It shows us, it will too, that
here are these other people that just said that Pilate, Herod, they recognize Jesus has no fault, but because of the envy and jealousy of the Jews, they just cannot, they're eating up with that.
You're exactly right.
Well, I believe that's why they chose him over Barabbas, because it was personal.
Yes, yeah, all of it was. And, he had, you just did not condemn the intellectual religious body without some repercussions. And Jesus called them, hypocrites, blind, the blind lead the blind, both. He called them everything under the sun. Whited sepulchres, Matthew 23, all those passages, woe unto you. And they chafed under all of that. But you're right. Envy, jealousy will lead people to do all kinds of things that are just, it just blinds them. Yes, sir.
Can't help but think early on in Matthew when they realize how Jesus is speaking, they said, we've got to find a way to stop him.
Mm-hmm.
It's that just kind of sets in my mind with everything that's going on now. What they were trying to do is finally coming to fruition.
Yes.
Whatever we've got to do, we're going to make it happen so we can stop it.
Yes. It's interesting, we've used the passage before in different contexts, but in Galatians 4:4, but when the fullness of the times came, God sent forth his Son, born of a woman, born under the law, that he might redeem them who were under the law, that we might receive the adoption of sons. The fullness of times, when everything was just ripe, R-I-P-E, for Jesus to come, for the government to be, for the people, for their attitudes to be as they were. All of this just worked hand in glove for Jesus to be crucified. We pointed out in an earlier lesson in Psalm 2, which the apostles quote in Acts, the 4th chapter. Why do the Gentiles rage? Remember that? The peoples imagine vain things. Kings of the earth set themselves together, and the rulers take counsel against the Lord and against his anointed, saying, let us cast away their cords from us. But he that sitteth in the heavens shall laugh. The Lord shall have them in derision. What they thought they were doing was taking care of their little matters and having it their own way, but actually they were accomplishing what? The overall will of God. Yeah. Okay. I mentioned in, let's see. H, how many times did Pilate continue to argue Jesus' innocence with these religious leaders? 3 times. And I mentioned at this point, Matthew and Mark both say Pilate ordered Jesus to be scourged and then crucified, as if the crucifixion immediately followed the scourging. However, John's account gives 2 more conversations. One between Pilate and the Jews, and one between Pilate and Jesus. First, though, Pilate plans to carry out his own intention, thinking this will appease the Jews and then be done with the matter. So then the next point is Jesus is scourged by the Roman soldiers, and then he's brought back. I had something on Pilate I wanted to share with you. For years, the only historical evidence that Pilate ever lived outside the gospel narratives was from the writings of Josephus and, of course, the Jewish historian, and Tacitus, the Roman historian. Pilate was a Roman governor of Judea during the reign of the second Roman emperor, who was Tiberius. That's mentioned in Luke 3. However, in 1961, a stone slab was located in Caesarea Maritima, or by the sea. This is actually a copy of it. That is in Caesarea. This is I've got some pictures of it, but this is actually one Leon Malden took. And you can see the open area back here, the Mediterranean Sea. This is a copy. The original is in the British Museum in London, but this is from Biblical Archaeology Review. One of the most sensational discoveries at Caesarea was this inscribed stone mentioned in Pontius Pilate, found in the step of the theater. It was originally part of a nearby temple honoring the Emperor Tiberius. The stone was moved to the theater to repair a step after the temple fell into disuse. The Latin on it here reads, Pontius Pilate, the prefect of Judea, has dedicated to the people of Caesarea a temple in honor of Tiberius. So a lot of times, people will say, well, you can kind of doubt this man ever lived, even if it's mentioned by one or two historians. The fact is, he was mentioned in the Bible. And if the Bible mentioned the Hittites, and then scholars said, I don't even think, we don't even think that there was ever a nation known as the Hittites, and then all of a sudden they see, the throne room and inscriptions and all. Oh, I guess we'll have to believe the Bible after all. That's no way. That's the rationalist point of view. As long as I can rationalize how something might have occurred, I'll believe it. Otherwise, I don't. Faith comes by the what? Not rationalization, but hearing the Word of God. If God says something, then it had to be true. I came across a quote years ago that I've used a number of times, that faith gives to things past and things present all the reality of present existence. Faith gives to things past and things future. Did I say present? Things past and things future, all the reality of present existence. That we can have confidence in things that happen backwards in time or what will happen in the future, and we can have the same confidence that we have of knowing that we exist right now. That faith, that's confidence, faith. Faith is assurance of things hoped for, that's in the future. A conviction of things not seen. Faith works in the area of the unseen. And so we want to keep that in mind. But anyway, I thought that was interesting. Okay, we're back into any comment or question? Okay, let's move on then. Well, here we are. Jesus is scourged and mocked by the Roman soldiers in Matthew 27. Let's read these passages. They're not that many. Matthew 27, 27 through 31. Lauren, would you read that for me? Matthew 27, 27 through 31. Audrey, Mark 15, 16 through 19. And Sister Janet, John 19, 1 through 3. All right, Matthew 27, 27 through 31. You got it? Matthew 27, 27 through 31.
And the soldiers of the governor took Jesus into the common hall and gathered unto him the whole band of soldiers. And they stripped him and put on him a scarlet robe. And when they had platted a crown of thorns, they put it upon his head, and a reed in his hand. And they bowed the knee before him and mocked him, saying, Hail, King of the Jews! And they spit upon him and took the reed and smote him on the head. And after that they had mocked him, they took the robe off from him and put his own raiment on him and led him away to crucify him.
All right, we made the point just a moment ago. That last phrase, and they led him away to crucify him. But before that, he comes back and has a conversation with, again, private before Pilate. That's right. Pilate has a conversation with the Jews, and then with Jesus, even after so they did take him away led him away to be crucified, but it wasn't immediately. It was a little bit later. All right, the Mark's account, Mark 15, 16 through 19. Okay, so they take him to the Praetorium, the common hall that would be within the fortress of Antonia. They call together the whole band or cohort. Richard, that would be about a tenth of a what? Tenth of a legion, roughly 500, 600 men. You were going to say something?
Well, a cohort is 1/10. That might be like the first or second line in the cohort.
Right. Right. So it's had a big crowd, you know. They'll figure out 500-600 men. None of the Jews are going to, you know, they're only there by permission for certain. All right, and then Luke's account, Luke 23, 13 through 22. Could I have read that? Janet, was that you?
No, it was John.
Who was Luke's?
Excuse me.
There's not.
Yeah, there's not one. John 19. I was looking back at my wrong page. Okay, Janet, John 19, 1 through 3.
So then Pilate took Jesus and scourged him, and the soldiers twisted a crown of thorns and put it on his head, and they put on him a purple robe. Then they said, "Hail, King of the Jews!" And they struck him with their hands. Pilate then went again and said to them, "Behold, I'm bringing him out to you, that you may know that I find no fault in him."
Okay, let's stop right there. So Jesus has him scourged, and then he goes back out and tells the people this. Then he has Jesus brought out, and remember verse 5, the end of verse 5, "Behold the man." So Jesus is standing there with his crown of thorns and this mockery of a robe, and he's just been beaten to shreds pretty much. And he's standing out there, and Pilate thinks that will incite in them maybe somewhat some sympathy, and let him go. And then Pilate and Jesus go back together, and we have the rest of that in just a little bit later in John's account. And then Pilate sentences him to death. All right, let's see if we can answer some of these. Time might be over by the time we get through. It seems that the scourging occurred first, as John 19:1 states. Then the mistreatment followed, as recorded in Matthew and Mark's account, gives the most complete story of the scourging. Write the whole story here. It's pretty short, isn't it? Pilate therefore took Jesus and what? And scourged him. That's the whole story, according to John's account. I mentioned in the note, I quoted McGarvey, Pilate, believed that the more moderate would take pity on Jesus when they viewed his scourged body, for scourging was so cruel a punishment that the condemned person often died under its infliction. The scourge was made of thongs loaded at the extremity with pieces of bone or metal. The condemned person was stripped and fastened to a low post, thus bending the back so as to stretch the skin. Blood spurted at the first blow. I read also where, according to the Jewish custom, now this would have been the Romans, but the Jewish custom was that they would they would scourge a person, actually the breast as well, and then the back. So both front and the back would be scourged as well. The body was at times, in the second note, torn and lacerated to such an extent that deep-seated veins and arteries, sometimes even entrails and inner organs, were exposed. Such flogging, from which Roman citizens were exempt, often it resulted in death, or it preceded execution and was ordered as a sign to indicate that the person to whom it was administered was about to be crucified. One can picture Jesus after the scourging, covered with horrible bruises and lacerations by wales and whelps. We're not surprised to read that Simon of Cyrene was compelled to bear the cross after Jesus had carried it a little while. It must, however, be borne in mind that the suffering of the man of sorrows was not only intense, but also vicarious. He was wounded for our transgressions, bruised for our iniquities. You think how Isaiah just kind of rolls over that? He was wounded and bruised. And then goes on to the next thing. And then we're seeing, historically, what was involved. The chastisement of our peace was upon him. What we deserve is the idea, the chastisement of our peace. What was necessary for us to obtain peace by being chastened was upon him. And with his stripes we're healed. Third note, Isaiah stated, "And as for his generation, who among them considered that he was cut off out of the land of the living, for the transgression of my people to whom the stroke was due." And again, "Yet it pleased the Lord to bruise him. He hath put him to grief, when thou shalt make his soul an offering for sin." The scene described by both the prophet and the gospel accounts indicate how God views our sins. As was usually the case, scourging preceded crucifixion and was a sign to indicate the person scourged was about to be crucified. Any sin, if not repented of, is likewise a sign of impending eternal spiritual death. You got both pictures there. From the above passages, it's obvious that God intended to teach us a lesson about sin in the crucifixion itself. When we think of the horrible sight of the mutilated body of Jesus, this is how our soul looks to God when we sin. Therefore, when we think that some sin is a little matter and is not that bad, then consider that sin looks to God like the body of Jesus looks to us. It's just terrible. And that ought to really open our eyes. Sin is no laughing matter. It's terrible. It alienates us from God. It cost Jesus all of this. And he was innocent. How many of you seen a movie or something, maybe an old Western, and the good guy is being beat up by the bad guys? And you just think, body blows, whether it be, old Western like I used to like, a Rifleman, or, High Chaparral, Bonanza, some of those old ones in the 60s. And some good guys, you just go, oh, don't do that, And you think, here is the Son of God. And the reason he's being so treated is because of my sins and yours. And that ought to just make us real with anger and hatred towards sin. Never think anything lightly of it. Let's do one thing. Time's gone. Turn over real quickly, 121. Our song book, one verse, 121. We sing about the events that we're now studying. 121, first stanza only. Oh, they tried my Lord and Master with no one to defend within the halls of Pilate. He stood with half a friend. Oh, be a friend to Jesus. My life for him has been. I'll be a friend to Jesus until my years shall end. I hope I would have been to Jesus what the song suggests if I'd lived there. And we all will be that through the rest of our lives. Thank you for your help.